What's going on YouTube? Welcome back to another King James video, and today we're going to be focusing primarily on portrait photography. Now, to be a little bit more specific, portrait photography on 35mm film. Now, portraits have been around since the early development of photography in general. From shooting daguerreotypes, having to hold a position for 15 minutes sitting still, to the instant convenience of digital photography. But right in between there, we have a medium that is near and dear to our hearts, and that is film photography. Now, film was the standard medium for photography before digital came for over a century. Even with how easy digital makes it to shoot portraits and have that instant convenience to check every single time whether or not you got the shot right, film photography is the absolute opposite. It's very unforgiving, so the lot can go wrong, and if you make a mistake, it could either break or make the photo. So with that being said, I'm gonna give you guys a couple tips for shooting portraits on 35mm film. So the first thing I want to talk about is the camera. Now, this right here is the Nikon F3. It's a beautiful, awesome camera, but it really doesn't matter what camera you have when you're shooting film. But for portrait photography, what really matters is the lens you use. Now, when shooting portraits, I generally like to tell people to stick with a more narrow focal length, something like the 50mm or the 85. You can even go up to 135 if you need to. The benefit of shooting a more narrow lens is you get this really nice depth of field, or some of you guys might know it as background blur. This allows you to get that really nice subject separation, so you have your subject in focus and then the background is completely washed out or blurred out completely. Now, if you want to do some environmental portraits, so you want to capture more of the scene or somebody in their own environment, go a little bit more wide. There's no problem with that. Go with a 35. I'd say anything under a 35, you can even try to get away with a 28, but anything under that is typically too wide for portraits. So my recommendation is, if you want to go wide, stick with the 35. Now, keep in mind when you shoot film, at least with classic SLRs, you're pretty much going to be manual focusing, which is essential in portrait photography because a lot of the time, autofocus cameras will miss the focus. My general rule of thumb is to always focus on the eye. As long as you get the eyes in focus, the picture is going to turn out beautiful. Now, let's say you miss focus and then you focus in on the nose. Just imagine what that picture will look like. You'll have a sharp nose, the eyes will be kind of blurry, and the whole entire face. As long as you lock focus on those eyes, you're going to be golden. So that's tip number one: shoot with a narrow lens like an 85 or a 50 to get that really nice shallow depth of field. But again, if you guys want to do environmental stuff, stick with the 35. Anything under it, in my opinion, is a little too wide. Now, the next thing I have for you guys is to shoot in aperture priority mode. Aperture priority mode is when you select the aperture on the lens and the camera will select the shutter speed for you. Some cameras have it built into the camera and some of them will allow you to do it through the lens. Now, if you don't have aperture priority on your particular camera, that's no issue. Just go ahead and shoot in manual mode. And a lot of people will ask why I go ahead and suggest shooting in aperture priority over manual mode in the first place. And the simple answer is shooting in aperture priority is just one less thing you have to worry about when you're taking the photos. When you're in manual mode, you can still think in aperture priority mindset where, you know, you're controlling it and you're compensating the shutter speed for the aperture. Shooting in aperture priority completely allows you to just focus on your subject and the composition. Again, like I said, it's just one less thing to worry about. Now, the reason why I suggest people to shoot in aperture priority also is because you can control the depth of field. And if you're shooting a fast prime lens like a 50mm 1.4, depending on your film speed, you should be okay to handhold your shot without a lot of motion blur. If you're shooting at a larger aperture like 1.4 or 1.8, you're gonna have more shallow depth of field, which means a more blurry background. But when you stop down to f5.6, f8, f11, that background starts to come back into play, you know, less out of focus, but your whole entire frame will be more in focus. Now, when I shoot my portraits, I generally stick around f2.8, f4, sometimes I even just go down to 1.4, but f2.8 is a good balance between sharpness and good shallow depth of field. Having that correct balance, especially if you're shooting like fashion portraits or you want to get somebody's outfit into the play, it's great to have a lot of it in focus with still having that background separation. So I suggest shooting in like f2.8, just really playing around with it. Aperture priority is amazing for portraits. Number 3. Use low-speed films. Generally, when you're shooting portraits, I always suggest you stay between the 100, 200, 400, 800 ISO range. 800 is kind of pushing it, but sometimes you can still get away with it. Now, lower ISO films typically mean less grain, or at least a finer grain. Now, even though grain can be beautiful in some situations, it might not be too flattering when there's a million dots on somebody's face. It almost looks like they have a bunch of pimples. Some of the films I suggest is Kodak Portra 400, Fuji 400H, or if you're trying to shoot some black and white, T-Max 400, T-Max 100, all super fine grained films that also give you beautiful skin tones. Now, I'm not saying, stay away from the higher ISO films like Delta 3200, but if that's the look you want to go for, by all means go ahead and do so. I know some people who actually like that look as well, but for me personally, if I want to get a clean image with nice skin tones without seeing a bunch of grain on that person's face, I generally stick to around the 200 to 400 ISO range. So that's the third tip. Use lower ISO films to get that nice grain structure to have a really nice clean image. Shooting during golden hour, if you guys didn't know what golden hour is, the last hour before the sun comes down over the horizon. And so typically what happens is there's this really nice glow to the photos, especially when you pair it with some different film stocks. A lot of these films, you know, they react differently to the sun and the light. So it's really awesome to see different results you can get from it. It's worth picking up 5 to 6 different rolls and really seeing what each can do and how it can handle the light when given. Take some front lit shots, take some backlit shots, and really experiment, because you will start to see the different results you can get from each film. And that's what's beautiful about film photography. Digital, you get one standard look from your camera. And of course you can post-process it to have different effects. But realistically, when you shoot film, you're having different effects every single time you shoot a roll. And to me, that's just amazing. And that's part of the reason why I love shooting film. So that's the last, fourth and final tip. Shoot during golden hour and try different film stocks. You will not be disappointed. Alright, so that's gonna wrap it up, you guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to drop a big like on the video down below. Also leave a comment if I missed something or any tips that you guys want to share with the film community. Again, I absolutely love making content for you guys. And I just want to say thank you for the unbelievable support. We're almost to 6,000 subs here on King Japes, and it's mind-boggling to see how much we're growing. So thank you, film community. Keep shooting film. As always, it's been King Japes. Me know it's a game, baby. Ka, 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 ka.